Hello, everybody. Paul Mancano, soon to be joined by Danielle Allentuck here at the Baltimore Banner offices in downtown Baltimore. We are live here on this Tuesday at 1 p.m. to discuss everything Orioles offseason. The hot stove is just about ready to heat up. It's still award season. We're still finding out about which Orioles players have won awards and which have not. But we're going to talk mostly about the roster needs. And with that, I bring in my co-host, Danielle Allentuck, doing the Sunday Night Football slide-in like Chris Collinsworth. Danielle, thanks so much for joining after went with Andy the first couple weeks. Good to get some fresh blood in here.
Of course, yes.
So let's talk Orioles offseason. Primarily what positions they need. I think we'll save for later chats exactly who could fill a lot of these roles, whether it's free agents or trades. But in terms of the current roster that they have, the main priority, I think, for Mike Elias and this front office should be starting pitching. We saw in the postseason how much it hurt them in those 3 games that they didn't have the pitchers lined up that they needed to. Of course, you could blame some of that on the fact that John Means wasn't on that ALDS roster. But the fact is they didn't quite have enough starting pitching depth for them to be able to keep pace with the Rangers in that series.
It wasn't even depth in that case. I mean, it was experience. There was somebody who can handle that situation. And they were just underprepared there. I don't think that anybody was expecting that kind of performance that they got out of Grayson and Kramer, but it's what happened. And what you saw was the Rangers starting pitchers crushed them. All series. They did that all postseason, and the Orioles just couldn't keep up. They don't have anybody else, really. Obviously, they have John Means, who didn't pitch in the postseason, but they won't have Kyle Gibson anymore. Cole Irvin is he's definitely more of a spot starter, long reliever guy. Seems shuffling back and forth between AAA again, but they need another starter and preferably somebody who can lead the rotation.
Yeah. So would you want to go out, if you're Mike Elias this winter, and say, let's get somebody to start game 1 of the season, game 1 of a postseason series? Or do you say, you know what? We liked what we got from Kyle Gibson last year. He was mostly an innings eater, but he was a veteran presence. We feel like we can fill out the back of the rotation. I am more on the side of get somebody who's going to be an ace or number 2 behind Kyle Bradish. Are you of that mindset as well?
I am. I mean, Kyle Gibson served a purpose. He was great at what he did, but for $10 million, I think they could have gotten more out of him. Obviously, his value was more behind the scenes. He was a great innings eater. He led the team in innings, and his body could handle it, which the rest of the starters could not. He was that veteran when John Means wasn't there, and they needed that, but I don't think they need that anymore. I mean,
Right.
All of their young starters have been through a season now. They know what it's like. Kyle Bradish, took a lot of steps forwards last year, but we don't know how that's going to carry over to next year. I think you go get the veteran who has done it, has the playoff experience, and has proven that he can lead rotation.
Yeah. And when they signed Kyle Gibson last year to that 1-year, $10 million contract, Mike Elias was talking about reaching a new gear with him and finding some things to exploit in his pitch arsenal going into this season. And they felt like his down 2022 season with the Phillies didn't really reflect the kind of pitcher that he was. I feel like I never quite saw that extra gear. I mean, he had a slight uptick in a lot of his, counting stats in terms of his ERA went slightly down, went from about a 5.05, I think, to a 4.87. His strikeout numbers went a little bit up. We saw, I think, higher peaks, but the valleys were still there for him. He still had some very down outings, and he wasn't called upon in the first 3 games of the ALDS for good reason, because he wasn't one of the Orioles' 3 best, maybe not even 4 best starting pitchers if John Means was healthy.
Right. And I also think this team is at a point now where you're not developing prospects in the majors anymore. You're not developing players in the major anymore. I mean, you're trying to win. You're trying to make it far in the postseason, and you don't want to take a chance on somebody anymore. You want a guy who has done it and that you can rely on. And maybe you take a chance on a prospect. Maybe that's where you're still taking some chances. But, if you're going to be spending $10 million on somebody, you should be smartly spending it on somebody who can have success.
Yeah, we are live as well on YouTube, so keep those comments going. We will try to address as many as possible. Thanks to Yikes for saying hi. Yikes and hi as well to you. Chris mentioning the roster definitely needs starting pitching, and I would go with Nola. I think Aaron Nola is going to be one of the higher paid pitchers this winter. He is a righty. When you look at this current rotation, you have Kyle Bradish definitely coming back a righty. Grayson Rodriguez, he's a righty. John Means, assuming he's healthy, is a lefty. He's going to be in that rotation for sure. You have a couple open spots at the back end. Would you personally, if you're Mike Elias, prefer a lefty if you had your choice, or would you be just looking for the best talent available?
I mean, I think first and foremost, the best talent.
Right.
But if you have your chance to go for a left-handed pitcher, go for him. And I think that ideally you get somebody obviously who can be there for a couple of years. I mean, they haven't signed a long-term contract in 3, 4 years. I can't even
Since Mike Elias took over, yeah.
Yeah, so it's about time to do that. I think a starting pitcher is the way to do it. And if that's how you get a top left-handed pitcher to come to Baltimore, that's how you have to do it nowadays.
Yeah. Getting a comment from Artie as well saying, let's get Eduardo Rodriguez. He is a lefty. He did opt out of the final 3 years and $49 million that he had on his contract with the Tigers. The Orioles are very familiar with Eduardo Rodriguez from his time with the Boston Red Sox. I feel like he is the kind of profile that would fit well at Camden Yards. But if he's opting out of 3 for 49, that means he's looking at something bigger than that. And like you said, Mike Elias has yet to hand out a contract longer than one guaranteed year. He did give Jordan Lyles the 1+1. He had a team option at the end of that. He had the same thing for Jose Iglesias, where he had a team option at the end of that. But he has yet to give a contract of more than one guaranteed year. This would likely be the offseason because you have proof of concept. You know, you could say in Elias's favor last year, the Orioles hadn't yet proven that they could be a good, sustainable team. And yes, they were coming off a season in which they were 500 in 2022, but there was no guarantee that they were going to be able to keep that up. Now you know you have a good core in place, and it's just getting the pieces around that. And I feel like if you're going to splurge in an offseason on a free agent outside of the organization, you're well within your rights to do it. It's just a matter of how much money is going to be at Mike Elias's disposal this winter.
Right. And I think it goes the other way too. For, they've said that they've, this is their word against ours, that they have tried to do these bigger contracts and it hasn't worked out. But now they have the track record of saying, hey, we won 101 games last year. Look at all our great young talent. You can come here for 4 or 5 years and they'll be here for that whole time. Gunnar and Adley are here for long haul at this point, regardless of an extension, they're still here. So you can say that to a free agent, like, hey, we're the place you should come and spend most of your career because we're going to be successful for a long period of time.
Exactly. On the BaltimoreBanner.com as well, I have an article about some outfielders, some infielders, some starting pitchers left and right that they could sign. And we got a comment as well about Cedric Mullins. This outfield is an interesting group right now because all 3 members of this outfield are positive WAR players. They're all good enough to start on pretty much any team around baseball. But none of them, I would say, is a star level player. Austin Hayes was an all-star this past year. Cedric Mullins has been an all-star in the past, but neither of those guys, I don't think, has guaranteed his spot on this team for the next 5 or 10 years. Right. And Anthony Santander is entering the final year of his deal. Cedric Mullins, Austin Hayes, both those guys are scheduled to hit free agency after the 2025 season. Do you feel like this outfield is a spot where Mike Elias could potentially look to move a veteran or two?
I don't know about move, and we were talking about this earlier. I think that they need another outfielder. I mean, they have their young prospects in Hudson Kirkstead and Colton Cowser. They both saw time in the majors this year, and I personally wasn't too impressed with either of them. I mean, I think that they are still developing. They have a long way to go, and that they will eventually be able to take over for one of those guys, either when they hit free agency or when they get traded. But I think there's room now for a backup center fielder and a guy who can fill in at every spot and hold his own at the plate. I think that you don't have that right now in their system, and that's what I would be looking for right now. I don't know.
McKenna doesn't do it for you?
I don't know if he's even going to make it through arbitration, to be honest. He's ARB1 for the first time this year. So
still a positive WAR player.
Yeah. And I mean, he would be making probably about league minimum. So it wouldn't be super expensive to hold on. I don't know his options off the top of my head, but I don't know if you can afford to trade an outfielder. And I don't really know why you would at this point, unless it's part of a mega deal to get a great starting pitcher.
Right. Yeah. And I've seen a lot of, stuff on social media about the Orioles potentially moving Anthony Santander. He's really been the subject of a lot of trade rumors over the last 3-4 years. The problem with trading Anthony Santander is, where are you going to get that power from? You can hope that it's going to come from Heston Kjerstad, and he has certainly shown it in the minors, but there's no guarantee that it translates to the majors.
And also, they don't trust Heston in the field yet.
Right.
So, he played maybe one game in the field last year, and it was after they'd already clinched the playoff spot. So it's something that they've openly said that they want to keep him as a DH for now. So that doesn't even fill that spot at all.
Right. Got a comment as well from Chris about Cody Bellinger and the possibility that he could be in Baltimore. He is a free agent. He did very well in his 1-year contract with the Chicago Cubs. I think that he's going to be out of the Orioles price range because I think the purpose of signing that 1-year deal, if you're Cody Bellinger, was to get your value up so that you could go out and cash in this free agency and probably sign a long-term deal. I tend to think a team with bigger holes in their lineup is going to splurge on Cody Bellinger.
Yeah.
That being said, the profile of Cody Bellinger would be a phenomenal fit in Baltimore because he can play center, right, left, all at an above average level. We've seen him play first base as well. His left-handed swing would look very good at Camden Yards. I just think for a guy that had as good a year for WAR around, according to Baseball Reference, that he did in 2023, I just think he's going to get a longer-term deal, don't you, Danielle?
I mean, yeah, and that's exactly why he did that. He's Scott Boras, who knows exactly what he's doing. So he sent him to Chicago for 1 year to do exactly that. And that profile that you're saying, that would go great anywhere. I mean, there's nobody who doesn't want that right now. And there are teams who are willing to spend the money on that. And I think the Orioles, they obviously haven't spent the money, but if they're going to spend the money, I don't think they're going to do it for another outfielder.
Right. Now, if you look at that outfield, though, what kind of profile would you prefer in terms of, let's say the Orioles don't make any moves in their outfield and they bring back Austin Hayes and Cedric Mullins and Anthony Santander, and they still have Colton Cowser and Heston Kjerstad in the mix. Would you want a right-handed hitter to maybe balance out Cedric Mullins, or would you just say best talent available, let's go with whomever is out there?
At this point, I would say best talent available. I think the thing is you need somebody, in my point of view, who can be reliable in center field. I mean, Austin Hayes has shown that before, but he's great in left field. I don't really know why you would move him at this point. But Cedric, for better or for worse, has an injury history, and he is going to need a backup who can fill in for him.
Yeah, we are live on YouTube, so keep those comments coming, and we will address all of those. Yeah, and I think with the Orioles, when you're talking about playing at Camden Yards, you almost need 2 center fielders.
Yes.
Because Austin Hayes' defense is great in left because of how gargantuan left field is and how interesting the bounces are out there. So you need somebody who can play above average defense in left field and in center field. I do think the benefit of having somebody like McKenna is that he does bring plus defense for the most part. And he does bring speed on the base paths, which for an Orioles team that is already pretty speedy around him, but maybe Jorge Mateo won't survive arbitration. Maybe he won't get as much playing time next year, whatever that maybe he's dealt. This Orioles team certainly likes, Brandon Hyde, it certainly likes the ability to bring a Ryan McKenna in off the bench, but I don't think speed is necessarily, a determining factor for an Orioles free agent outfielder. It's just defense is going to be a big thing and being able to hold his own in the lineup.
They also do have now, they picked him off waivers a couple days ago, Sam Hilliard from the Braves, but he spent the first 4 years of his career in Colorado. So he knows how to handle a big outfield better than most. He's a star defender. He is a fast runner. He has had mixed results at the plate. He is going to arbitration, so I'm kind of curious to see what happens to both him and McKenna. I think they're very similar profiles to me, strong defenders, fast runners, but so hitters. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen to both of them this year.
So moving on from, we talked about starting pitchers off the top. We just talked about outfield. This infield, I feel like, is pretty much set going forward. Now, you could make the case that maybe the Orioles will deal from that infield depth, that remarkable infield depth that they have, and then that will create a hole. But as it stands, you have Gunnar Henderson, who split time between third base and shortstop last year. You have Ramon Arias, who won a Gold Glove at third base a year ago. Now, he did take a step back last year, both offensively and defensively as well. But he has the ability to play second base. Jorge Mateo, another guy who took a slight step back. He's valuable, though, at least as a bench piece. And then Jordan Westburg, who was probably, other than Gunnar Henderson, he was the most promising rookie, maybe Grayson Rodriguez other than him. But he was a very promising rookie who can play multiple positions and at an above average level. You got to feel good about the group that you have between second base, shortstop, and third base right now.
And a couple still in the minors.
Yeah,
who will,
exactly.
in Jackson Holiday, the top prospect in baseball, who will be there at some point next year, probably by the All-Star break at the latest. So they're very set there. I think they're set at first base. I'm very curious to see what they do with Mateo and Urias. at the non-tender deadline just because I don't know if they need either of them anymore. I
Right.
mean, I could see them maybe keeping one of them, but, they don't. Ramon's greatest aspect last year was his versatility,
Right.
but Jordan Westberg is also versatile, and Gunnar is versatile, and Jackson's versatile. So I just don't know
All younger and cheaper.
exactly. I don't know how they are fitting it in the future anymore.
Yeah. And this Orioles farm system, which is the number one farm system in all of baseball, their strength is the infield. Joey Ortiz, we saw get a cup of coffee in the big leagues last year. I still am high on his potential, and I'm sure the Orioles are as well. Graded as an elite defender at shortstop. He can play third. He can play second base. We saw last year in the minors, Connor Norby didn't get the call up to the big leagues, but he can play second base at a pretty good level from what we've heard. He can play a corner outfield. He tried that as well this year. So they have guys in the minor league system. Kobe Mayo, who had another good year in the minor leagues, a younger prospect, drafted out of high school in 2020, but he's going to play third base at a solid level because of the arm strength that he has. As Roger says, don't forget about Mayo. You can't forget. It's hard to not forget about all these guys, but those are three guys who I'm sure teams around the league are looking at and saying, these guys are major league infielders. What positions exactly they end up playing, we'll see. But the Orioles have this huge amount of talent in the infield. And at a certain point, you have to consider, is it worth running Ramon Urias out there every game or every other game, or keeping a roster spot for Jorge Mateo when you want to see what you have in Kobe Mayo and Joey Ortiz? And maybe one of those guys turns out to be a large piece of the future.
And look, I mean, it's not even just that. When you think of the Orioles, they are cheap. They're cheaper, they can fill those roles. And if they, aren't up to that level, it's okay. You just send them back to AAA.
Right.
They have other people who they can cycle through. So I just don't know why they would keep them at this point unless they want to trade one of those younger guys for a pitcher.
Right. It's just a tough balancing act for Mike Elias because you don't want to make the wrong move. It's great to have all this talent, but you still can, falter here and there if you trade the wrong guy. We've seen what it's done to other teams like the Cardinals when they've traded away guys who were on the verge of the big leagues or, had a cup of coffee in the big leagues and then eventually were dealt and turned into better players. You don't want to trade away the wrong guy and have Joey Ortiz shine and be excellent with another team, or Kobe Mayo do the same thing.
Well, you also have the other side of it is that Mike's track record in trading this year wasn't great.
Not excellent.
I mean, he got Jack Flaherty and Shintaro Fujinami, both of which were kind of liabilities by the end of the year, So I think you have to keep that in mind too. You have to make sure that the return you're getting is going to be that much better than the possibility of what you're sending away.
Yeah, that is an excellent point because you can't fault Mike Elias's draft record in the slightest. That's part of the reason that their director of draft operations, Brad Seelick, got hired away by the Nationals is because, yes, they've had top picks, but they've made the most of those top picks. Right. They, have drafted Adley Rutschman number 1 overall. They've drafted Jackson Holliday number 1 overall. Heston Kjerstad was the number 2 overall pick. He was not a slam dunk at the time. Colton Cowser, another top 5 pick. Gunnar Henderson was the 2nd round pick. Jordan Westberg, a 30th overall pick. Yeah. Those are all excellent selections, and that's where this team has built, its foundation. But the trades have been less promising. Right. And the Orioles haven't gotten a whole lot back for some of the prospects that they've sent out. And they've only made really 2 or 3 of those style trades since Mike Elias took over. Cole Irvin was really the first time that they were trading a prospect out to get a major leaguer back in.
And we all know that one turned out.
Exactly.
I mean, it was so-so. I mean, he was a spot starter, but he's not, part of the future probably.
And Darryl Hernandez was, according to Baseball America, the top Oakland Athletics prospect of the year. Yeah. He had a phenomenal year and finished the year with AAA. He may not have had a spot with Baltimore long-term. Drew Rom, Cesar Prieto may not have had a spot long-term with the Baltimore Orioles, but they were still promising prospects, and the Orioles just didn't get a whole lot back for those guys.
Exactly. Maybe you can make the argument that at the deadline it was a seller's market, and the Orioles had trouble there, but it's still neither of those deals resulted in anything for them.
Yeah. We are live on YouTube, so keep your comments coming. We are going to talk more about the Orioles offseason, Paul Mancano and Danielle Allentuck. So, Danielle, we talked about the starting pitchers. We talked about the outfield. We talked about the infield. Should we get to the relievers?
I think we should.
All right. Well, because that is another area of need for this team. I think it probably ranks behind starting pitchers for me in terms of what Elias's priorities should be this offseason. If for no other reason than you lost your starting closer. You lost one of the best closers in all of baseball last year in Felix Bautista. He's not expected to pitch at all in 2024. You have a massive hole at closer. Maybe Yennier Cano can fill that spot, but we saw him be so-so as a ninth inning pitcher down the stretch after Bautista went down. And even if Cano is your closer and they feel good about that going forward, you still have some holes in terms of the seventh, eighth, maybe even sixth inning guys to fill in there.
And I think what you need to start with when you're talking about the bullpen is what is Tyler Wells and DL Hall? What are their roles going to be next year? Because they have said that they haven't ruled them out being a starter like they were both in the past. But I thought they shined as relievers in the postseason. I thought that they looked really strong there. I thought they were confident there. And I think that that's where the Orioles need them to be unless they're going to go out and sign a bunch of relievers. So,
right.
I mean, I think those can be your late inning guys. They've had a lot of success with getting, Danny Coulomb for cheap, for getting, some of these other players, but they're also losing probably a bunch of their veterans. They already lost Michael Givens. Keegan Atkin was barely up last year. Dylan Tate had injuries. So I think that they really need that in-between group of players right now to fill those earlier innings.
Yeah, it was a massive loss last year to lose Dylan Tate for the entire year, an injury that we were not expecting him to be out the entire year with. He was talking before spring training about being there on time, and yet he did not appear in a single game. Michael Givens appeared in 4 games for this team?
4 innings.
4 innings for this team this past year. He's a free agent. You lose him. You hope you're getting Dylan Tate back for this season, but can't get really guarantee that. They needed especially a righty setup man down the stretch. It was part of the reason that they claimed Jorge Lopez at the start of September, because they were just desperate for some kind of bullpen depth that they didn't have.
Right.
And they got a little bit unlucky because Bautista was injured after the trade deadline. So maybe Mike Elias would have gone out and been more aggressive and tried to get Paul Sewald or somebody else at the deadline. But going forward, I mean, they have more holes in this bullpen than you might have thought several months ago.
And I think the thing is, with the bullpen, you don't have a lot of prospects close to the majors like you do maybe in other eras. Even in starting pitching, you have a couple guys who are coming up and are close. But for the relievers, I mean, I can't really think of anybody off the top of my head who is close to the majors and can fill a role for them or could be called up this year and make an impact right away. So they just need depth there. You saw at the end, Cano probably had a little bit of inning fatigue there. He pitched a lot, especially after Bautista was gone. So they just need people that they can cycle through and trust in those big situations.
I think there is a possibility that one of the starting pitchers that they have at AAA Norfolk could be a reliever for this team.
That's true, yes.
Chase McDermott, Cade Povich, Seth Johnson, who didn't finish the year with AAA, but I think he's expected to be in AAA at least for a portion of this season. Maybe one of those guys could be a reliever going forward. But we just haven't seen them do it yet.
Right.
So it does take a little bit of a transition. I'm glad you brought up DL Hall and Tyler Wells, because I think the temptation might be there for the Orioles this offseason to give DL Hall another run at being a starting pitcher. I don't think the Orioles should necessarily go down that path, because we saw how good he can be as a reliever. We've seen him struggle mightily as a starter in the minor leagues, especially struggle with command and walks and keeping those down. If you have an elite lefty out of the bullpen like DL Hall, and like DL Hall can become, that's such a weapon to have this season. And I think the Orioles would probably be better served keeping him in the bullpen, trying to find another lefty free agent starting pitcher out there, than forcing something and making DL Hall something that at this point he hasn't shown he can be.
I mean, I agree. And I think the thing is that you're going to have growing pains if you put him back in rotation and risk maybe another potentially racist season for DL Hall. I mean, most of this year for him was spent in Sarasota, regaining strength and kind of reimagining the type of pitcher he was going to be.
Yeah.
And that's when he became the star reliever for the Orioles. And I think he showed a lot of potential. And I don't really know why you would mess with that, to be honest. I think Tyler Wells is a little bit different because he's had success as a starter, but he has not had success for a full season.
Right.
So I don't know if I would necessarily want to mess with him either.
We are live on YouTube. Saw a comment from Mouse Talk saying that we are lagging. We hope that our internet is solid and hopefully we're not lagging too much. But stick with us as we take your comments. I saw a comment from Addit, probably butchered that. Does Gunnar Henderson potentially winning Rookie of the Year impact whether the Orioles sign somebody with a qualifying offer? That is an interesting question because it does certainly impact their draft pick formula for next year.
Right.
So if Gunnar Henderson were to win Rookie of the Year, the Orioles would get a high draft pick in as reward for having Gunnar Henderson on the roster the entire season and having a quality player do that. However, Mike Elias likes to stack draft picks.
Mhm.
We've seen it in the past. We saw it with the trade that got them Judd Fabian because that was a draft pick that they got back. I believe that was the Tanner Scott Cole Sulser trade that they got a high compensatory pick back from the Marlins. Mike Elias has built this team with draft picks. He does very well in the draft. That is his Super Bowl. So I don't think he is going to be willing to give up a draft pick by any means. And whether that's signing somebody who received the qualifying offer, not that many guys did receive the qualifying offer, and we'll see who ends up declining. They have a short window in which to decide. But I don't think the Orioles are going to dip their toe into that water because Mike Elias just loves his draft picks. It's a cheap, easy way to get talent. And if you can avoid giving up a draft pick by signing somebody who is offered the qualifying offer, I think Elias is going to avoid that.
But I agree. I think that's his mindset.
That's the most likely thing to happen.
But
yeah,
I think if he is the right person for this club, if he's the right person who can fill that role that they need right now, he needs to change his mindset to when you're building for right now, you do have to sacrifice a little bit of the future.
right.
And it's not like you would gain another top draft pick with Gunnar. So I don't think you necessarily
You're giving up that much.
Right. Like I think if you're building for right now, you have to sacrifice a little bit.
Yeah. And in terms of who did get the qualifying offer, I believe Aaron Nola did with the Phillies.
Mhm.
Blake Snell did with the Padres. Those two guys are going to be paid top dollar at the top of the market. But you are giving up a draft pick if you do sign one of those guys. Some guys that did not, I think it's interesting. I don't think Jordan Montgomery was eligible for the qualifying offer to receive that from the world champion Texas Rangers because he didn't spend the whole season with the team. And I think you have to spend the entire season with the team. So Jordan Montgomery, another guy who's going to be near the top of the market.
Mhm.
He is a lefty. It's going to be very intriguing for the Orioles to potentially go out and sign. I don't know if Elias is going to be willing to spend that much on a starting pitcher, but it is nice that he does not have the draft pick qualifying offer attached to him.
And I think he's exactly what this team should be looking for. I mean,
Yeah.
he obviously has playoff experience. We saw that. He is a lefty. You know, he's strong. He's a veteran. I think that he could fit in really well with the staff.
Yeah. Saw another comment from Mouse Talk. Glad we're not lagging for you, Mouse Talk, anymore. I like our top three starters. If we could get another number two starter, that would be amazing. I agree. And I talked last week with Andy Koska about how, yes, the Orioles, were swept in that series against the Rangers. They were really only competitive in game one before that series fell off.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say one starting pitcher would have been the difference in that series, but if you had another number one or number two starter, it certainly would have been a different series because Kyle Bradish, you assume he still gets the ball in game one. But if you had somebody to throw out there in game two instead of Grayson Rodriguez, maybe that's a more competitive game. The Orioles ended up scoring a lot of runs. Maybe they go to Texas 1-1 with Grayson Rodriguez starting a much lower pressure game in game three with a day off beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that is a different series. I'm not saying, one pitcher would have been the difference, but if you just had a number one or number two on this team, it feels like the Orioles would have been much more competitive with the Rangers.
Or even if you start Grayson in game two and he has the type of start that he does, somebody who can piggyback him. True. And then you're not screwed for game three and a potential game 4 or 5. Yes. That's what they were missing this year is that when their starter needed to come out, they didn't have that strong other starter who could come in and fill and keep the score the same for them.
Yeah. They ended up going with Jacob Webb, who was a waiver claim, and that just kind of showed the lack of depth that they had, especially in the bullpen.
Right.
Because you would like to have, Dylan Tate or Michael Givens in that spot. And just because of injuries and because of the way that the Orioles built that bullpen, they didn't have anybody to throw in that spot.
Yeah.
Saw another comment about the potential of the Orioles to sign Kenta Maeda. That might be an interesting name out there as well for the Orioles. I believe that Maeda is in his age 35 season coming up. He did produce 1.1 WAR last year, 4.23 ERA in 21 games, 20 starts. He pitched out of the bullpen last year for Minnesota, so they didn't even rely on him as a starting pitcher. He'd probably be a veteran presence that Mike Elias might be able to get on a 1 or 2 year deal.
Yeah, and it could be relatively cheap.
Yeah. I'm not sure if he slots into the top of the rotation.
I don't think so.
He would probably fit in, I think, maybe behind John Means or Grayson Rodriguez in the number 3 spot. A valuable veteran that they could add, certainly. But one of those guys that I think if the Orioles sign Kenta Maeda, they may be wanting more by midseason. And maybe that's an okay spot for Mike Elias to be, because maybe he feels more prepared for this year's trade deadline than he was for last year's, and feels like he can go out and get that guy via trade. We saw what his Astros did while he was there in terms of acquiring Justin Verlander and guys via trade at the trade deadline. So maybe he thinks, this is a possibility for us, grow the bats and trade for the arms. But Kenta Maeda, I think, would certainly be interesting. Are there any other names? Lucas Giolito is out there as well, somebody who struggled near the end of the season, but he was on 3 different teams over the course of the season. He had a rocky year. Sonny Gray, I believe, I posted recently about the possibility of signing Sonny Gray, and people were nonplussed, I think, although I think that he would still be a good option out there. Seth Lugo, Frankie Montas. Is there somebody out there that you think would fit for the Orioles?
I have another thought that just came to me too. Is that I would not be opposed to this team, riding out this postseason, seeing what John Means looks like next year, maybe giving one of these prospects a chance, and then at the trade deadline mid-season, that's when you go acquire a top starter. I think that is also a fine way to do that. I think that they would be better off signing somebody for a long-term deal, just for longevity's sake. But I think that could also be a possibility for them.
Yeah, and they certainly have the prospects to make any deal pretty much that they would like to. They can acquire just about anybody that they would like to, but it is a gamble when you do that, because you are relying on certain guys becoming available, and guys become available every year that you don't expect. I don't think anybody at the start of last season was expecting Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer to be available.
Right.
But you are still relying on, things breaking the right way for you. And you're also not getting that guy for the first half of the season. And in a very competitive AL East, you're going to want to win as many games as possible from start to finish. It's not going to be most likely a down division like it was this past year. It's going to be another competitive year for the AL East, and especially depending on what the Yankees and Red Sox do in free agency. So they're going to need to win those games at the start of the year. And if you're waiting until the trade deadline, you are probably, thinning out that rotation to start the year.
True. I mean, that's a good point.
We are live on YouTube. Thank you to everybody for commenting as well. Danielle, I think we're going to do this once a week.
Yep.
Tuesdays at 1 p.m. We're going to have some more in-depth conversations about free agents, about potential trade targets. As award season continues to roll along, the Orioles getting an award from Mike Elias as MLB's Executive of the Year.
Right.
I think it's kind of funny that he won it this year, because I don't think there was any one thing in particular this year. It's just the culmination of all the moves he made along the course of the
everybody sees all the moves he made. So now he's getting his moment.
Right. He could have won it last year for drafting Jackson Holiday number 1 overall, but nobody knew he was going to be this good. But you have Gunnar Henderson. I think we both think is going to win AL Rookie of the Year.
Absolutely.
He was named a finalist. Do you think Brandon Hyde is the favorite among the finalists to win AL Manager of the Year?
I do, just because votes are done before the postseason.
Sure.
So, what he did in the regular season, nobody can compete with.
Right. And especially taking that team that, many projected to win in, 75 to 80 games. They go out and they win 101 games in the AL East. I think that you should give him the award, but we'll see if he ends up beating out the competition. But it's an exciting time for the Orioles, because this is an important offseason as we inch closer to winter meetings and we get closer to some of the big name free agents coming off the board as well. Thanks to everybody for following along. What's your Twitter handle? @D_Allentuck?
Yes.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay. At Paul Mancano is my Twitter handle. At All Banner Sports is where you can follow all of our good stuff. And the BaltimoreBanner.com, $1 for 6 months, a ridiculous deal that you can sign up
Can't
for.
beat that.
That'll
No.
get you through the entire offseason and then some, maybe into spring training. I can't do math. I think I will. That for just a single dollar. That is ridiculous in terms of what you can get. And we're going to be doing these chats weekly, Tuesday on our YouTube channel. So please subscribe, hit the alerts button so you can get a notification every time that we go live. For Danielle Allentuck, I'm Paul Mancano. We'll catch you next time.